Hi! So I know that I'm slightly late to this whole New Year, New Me, New Greetings game on YouTube, but I hope that 2024 was a delight and exceptional year for you, and 2025 will be multiple times better. So for myself, I've took a 1 week trip of vacation in China at the tail end of 2024, and this will just be a sharing session from my own observation and my own personal lived experiences. And of course, a big caveat here is that this is entirely my own experiences. It might not necessarily translate to investment returns, so just listen with a pinch of salt. And of course, I do have quite a bit that I want to go through, so from time to time, you'll see me referencing my materials or my notes on the left. With that aside, for those of you who are not following me on Instagram, I post most of my live or personal updates there, so feel free to follow me. I'll leave the link in the description box down below. Anyway, anyhow, I'll talk mostly about my China trip and my reflections and my observations. Maybe in the second part, a much shorter version, I'll be speaking a little bit about how the Chinese market has transpired in 2025. So I flew over to Xi'an, China on the 24th, and I visited a total of 3 cities, Xi'an, Chengdu and Chongqing, and I basically took their high-speed rail. So if I were to do it again, I wouldn't have packed 3 cities in just a 1 week trip. Truth be told, I actually didn't want to visit 3 cities, I just wanted to go to Chengdu and Chongqing. But because the flight ticket flying into Xi'an was a lot more cheaper, that's why we decided to just do a 24-hour at Xi'an and then just move on to Chengdu and Chongqing. Now, I think the biggest sentiments around many foreigners today when looking at China as a country from a third party's point of view is that they feel that it's a very overwhelming country. It's a country with a lot of surveillance. They feel like your privacy is being intruded, and I can understand why. So when I first arrived at the airport, there was a lot of data collection and harvesting. And long story short, they want to collect a lot of primary data from the host or from the traveler itself, whether it's from fingerprints to facial recognition, etc., etc. So I can kind of understand why some foreigners might feel uncomfortable, and it's kind of very different when traveling to other countries. And to further add to the point, my first TT ride, which is something similar to Uber or Grab for those of you out there, there was actually a CCTV right inside the cab, pointing towards the passenger side. I'm not too sure whether this is a common phenomenon, but at least from my end, I don't think I've seen a CCTV in the cab before. So this was not prevalent in every single cab or taxi or TT rides that I've sat into, but this was really my initial impression when I got onto it. So as I round up this entire topic on the whole idea of privacy and people constantly monitoring you. When I moved over to the second city, when I went from Xi'an to Chengdu, when I checked into my Chengdu hotel, there was also a 10 minutes delay because the receptionist told me that they needed to report to the government, or whatever that means. Because I didn't land in Chengdu, so I went into Xi'an, took a high-speed rail down into Chengdu. So that was just some, I guess, inconvenience and some reporting and tracking of people in real time. So let's get right into my first TT ride, which is my first Uber ride. So my girlfriend, who's a lot more fluent in Mandarin, helped me quiz the TT driver, or the taxi driver in this case, about some of the questions that many of you have in mind. So we first, of course, covered about the topic of e-commerce platforms, and we asked him about Taobao, Jingdong, and Pinduoduo, all these 3 platforms. What were his thoughts, what was his consumption pattern, and how does he see the consumption trend growing. He actually used all 3 platforms, but it's mainly a girl's thing, so his wife shops a lot more online. For himself, he just does the essential and he's not really in tune about the whole consumption pattern per se. Next up, I definitely wanted to quiz him a lot more in terms of the alcohol and drinking culture in China. So specifically on alcohol, I think in that whole Shanxi and Xi'an district, people actually do like to drink quite a bit. But mostly, they like to drink their own local famous liquor, which is called 细分酒. And upon further discovery, I think there are 4 famous spirits in China today. Firstly, of course, you have your Mao Tai. Secondly, your Wu Liang Ye. Thirdly, which is this 细分酒. And the last one, I can't really remember anymore. But yeah, we briefly talked about it. And I did kind of ask him a little bit more on Mao Tai, on whether he consumes it, does he like it, etc. He said that they do drink Mao Tai, but mostly only during Chinese New Year, or the Lunar New Year, which is coming at the end of January. So it's a once-a-year thing, much more so because of tradition, some sort of a luxury product. So you only consume it very sparsely, and when you have big gatherings, and in English, I think you can vaguely translate it as besides treating your guests properly. And I think on a side note, he did specifically mention that Moutai is kind of reserved for those 在当官. In English, if I were to translate, is people in politics or people in authority. They tend to be the larger consumer of that rather than the normal laymen or the normal lay families, because they all have their own preferences. Besides, he also mentioned that there were too many fakes out there, so you kind of need to be careful and try to only procure a Moutai from official channels. So for myself, because of a tight budget on that trip, I cannot really afford to buy a 500 or 750 ml of the flagship Moutai product, so I can only afford the ice cream. And I even kept the bottle here with me here. And this costs 66 RMB, and that translates to around, I think, 10 US dollars, just for a very small ice cream. So on a side note as well, I think an adjacent kind of a small town or area, which is called Xianyang, they were experiencing some sort of a haze at that point in time. So he was also talking about how the government or the local government actually provided free public transport for those in that area. And you can kind of hear from the tone that there was some sort of a gratitude to the local government. A lot different from even my local cab drivers, where they basically just continuously scold the government. But I think that's besides the point because of the different cultures. And so moving on to the second larger topic that I want to talk about, which is my general observations of the usage of APP, which is applications, your mobile applications specifically. So I think when traveling across many of these different transport systems and stuff like that, I think when you look at people just scrolling on their phone, they are generally on a few of these large apps, and I can name them. So you have WeChat, you have Douyin, you have Xiaohongshu, Weibo, Taobao, Pinduoduo, which is your e-commerce platforms. And I actually even managed to capture a quote-unquote stealth shot on the public transport to give you some sort of a general feel and observation of the general Chinese population. Everyone is basically on all these applications. So everyone is literally on WeChat. I've never, at least in my own personal experience, I've never seen anyone else out in the public use a different messaging platform except foreigners like myself that still use apps like, I guess, WhatsApp and Telegram because we have VPN or we use a different SIM card. So it seems to me that at least for WeChat per se or Tencent per se, there is no competitor at all. So at least based on this data set, you can kind of tell that Tencent's WeChat has kind of a 100% penetration rate. So on the negative side, you can think of it from an investor point of view that they kind of hit maturity. There really isn't a lot of room for growth left because they basically penetrated the whole of China. Potentially, they could expand overseas, but I think unless you want to contact somebody locally, which is in China, you wouldn't want to use WeChat. Because of your network effect and habits outside of China, you are probably already using other apps. But on the positive side, you can kind of see WeChat as this data aggregator. They have data on the whole of China's consumer base today, and it really depends on how they intend to monetize moving forward from here. And also, many of these applications are not foreigner friendly as expected. Many of them lack English translation, so you really need to know the Chinese language, or you need someone to help you. If not, you are really being kind of priced out of this entire ecosystem that they operate in China today. Furthermore, on this note as well, a lot of the signboards, a lot of all the menus and stuff, they are all denoted in Chinese language. If I can speculate, a lot of them really rely heavily on domestic tourism. They couldn't care less about these foreigners, that's why they don't bother translating. I think when I draw a stark contrast to a lot of the other countries in my region that I visit, like Japan, Korea, a lot of them have English or even Chinese translation. Guess where the incentives are, and yeah, long story short, they couldn't care less. And also, when you visit a lot of all these merchants, they are constantly talking about free delivery. The free delivery, initially, I thought they can do overseas, but a lot of all this free delivery spending threshold is when you spend over a certain amount and they can deliver throughout anywhere around China. So yeah, it's really targeted to domestic tourism. Thirdly, I wanted to talk to you about this app called Meituan. So initially, from a third party's point of view, I really don't understand the allure of Meituan because a lot of investors tend to compare them to the Grab or the Ubers of the rest of the world. But Meituan, I tell you, based on my own personal lived experiences, it's really an 80-20 rule. Out of the entire scooter network or ecosystem that I see in China, everybody's wearing yellow, and you can see just Meituan deliveries everywhere. I do see a few blue people, blue riders around, which is Elema or Eleme. They are owned by Alibaba, but you can tell that really Meituan dominated the entire industry, and there are a lot and when I say a lot, there's really a lot of scooters in China. It's a very prevalent form of transport there, and they do drive quite recklessly and aggressively on the roads itself. But I think specific to Meituan, I think it's a fairly interesting app because I couldn't really, if it was really just like Grab, then I don't see the appeal as an investment. But I think they really do have a mindshare monopoly, and they kind of train consumers to go onto their platform intuitively. So for myself, I think at least for me and my partner and my girlfriend, she's kind of hooked onto Meituan because we get to enjoy a few free $0 bubble tea. And yes, I did say it properly, $0 bubble tea. They are super aggressive with their client acquisition strategy and a lot of their money saving tips because they use this thing called 团购, which is where you buy as a group and they try to do some sort of a bulk discount as they establish their network with many of these merchants. Let me give you an example. So I was having 烤鱼 at this place. The normal price at that place is around 120 RMB for that particular set meal. But if you go into Meituan, because of this bulk discount, you can buy so-called a coupon where it brings down the price to $110. And I think in Chinese, there's really this term called 薄利多销, where you try to get low margins, but because of great volume, you are able to earn a profit. So what Meituan really do is to aggregate all the customers onto their platform, and because they have the traffic, they can then negotiate with many of these merchants to strike out a deal, a discount, an offer, or things like that. And because of this mind share and this training and habit, every time you try to go to somewhere, the first thing you do is to try to search for their company or search for that merchant or that F&B place in Meituan app and to see if you're able to get some sort of a discount or not. So, but at the back of my mind, when I'm trying to run the calculus, I'm always thinking, who's actually at the losing end? Are the merchants losing? Because I believe that Meituan is probably going to levy some sort of a fee because they are driving this volume to the merchants, and will the merchants really come out better because of this partnership or not? This I'm not too sure. So that's just my own, at the back of my mind, I'm just thinking about it. But not going to lie, I do see some sort of an investment case for Meituan, not only in terms of food delivery and the entire ecosystem and network that they have, but more so as well because they own the traffic and they own this mindshare of the consumers. And I don't think anyone comes close to them, at least based on my own experiences so far. On a side note as well, I think Meituan, when you think about Meituan, you have food delivery. Many of these hotels nowadays, they are very technologically enabled. I won't call them advanced because it's really just very basic chat-enabled function. So I think I'd like to make a small distinction here is that yes, as a first-timer, I'm going to China maybe for the first time, you look at some of these technologies, you're impressed, but whether it adds value and ultimately into the value chain, that I'm not too sure. I'm coming from an investment point of view. Now moving onto the third bucket that I'm going to talk about, which is on the payments ecosystem and platform. So as you should know by now, it's a duopoly between Alipay and WeChat Pay. And of course, throughout my trip, I only used Alipay. So of course, firstly, it's by choice. And secondly, as a foreigner, I actually do have some troubles with the verifications on WeChat Pay. So I primarily just use Alipay. And there, I think you have three main modes of payment methods. So firstly, it's where you scan, meaning you scan many of these merchants' QR code. Secondly, it's where they scan. So they have this, some sort of I don't know what you call it, a payment processor where they're able to just scan your QR code, you just show the merchant. And thirdly, it's through the NFC payment, which is something like a PayWave. So I do have a story that I want to share about this scanning network or scanning security or whatnot. So firstly, I must share that I'm quite impressed by their whole scanning technology because I think through the many forms of payment system that I've experienced, even through Visa, Master, PayWave and just our normal QR scanning, at least from a personal consumer point of view in Singapore or at least in the rest of the world, we sometimes do experience some sort of a network delay, some sort of a slow payment, error and stuff. But throughout that whole 1 week, I've never experienced any sort of error and it's lightning fast. Lightning fast to the extent that I'm sometimes a bit worried because when they say that they scan me, sometimes it's from their own machine and they have this, I don't know, QR or infrared thing. And more often times than not, I'm standing at quite a distance and I haven't even completely moved my whole phone to let them scan my QR code. I just maybe go through it halfway, at least that's based on my own perception. I was just turning my phone and then the payment just went through. So Sometimes I'm also slightly worried that if my phone is lost or the merchant is not being friendly or they input the wrong amount and then voila, your money is just missing. And that's why I say I have a story to share. I was basically at this tourism area and yeah, most of the prices in that street was basically jacked up like at least twice or 3 times the normal market rate. And we basically went to this place that was selling some snacks or souvenirs that we wanted to take back home. For those of you who have went to China before, you know that sometimes the sales associates can be quite aggressive and they're telling you that everything is cheap, it's affordable, don't worry about the price tag and stuff like that. So initially when we were taking some of this snacks back, so we just casually asked her how much would this generally cost. And she said that it's less than 1斤. So 1斤, for context, it's less than 500 grams. So they count the snacks by grams. So I believe the pricing was around 120 RMB for 500 gram, which is 1斤. So we were thinking that, okay, so maybe we'll take a little bit more to match up to 1斤, which is 120. And after taking a bit more, and then we went to the counter, she just basically measured and weighed the items and then said that, oh, let me scan you. But we didn't even know how much we were being charged. And because my girlfriend was taking out her phone and she was scanning the QR code, and I looked at the measurement, and it came up to around 2.5 jing, which is around 1.25 kg. And we really didn't know because they were all the small snacks that you probably can't tell how much they weigh. And she just keeps saying that, oh, let me scan you, let me scan you. And my girlfriend was already opening the app and ready to scan. And I immediately asked how much was the bill. And she said that it was around $250 or $300 RMB. A far cry from the whole $120 that we expected to pay. So I think that was really I guess, some sort of a personal encounter. It's not saying that we don't want to pay or we think that the measurement is wrong, but it's really more of a expectations mismatch, and we just wanted to buy, let's say, 500 gram worth of snacks rather than, I think it was closer to 1.2, 1.3 kg. So yeah, I think this whole scanning technology was just a very interesting anecdote that I wanted to kind of share and to ask you guys to beware and be careful. Whenever you want to spend or you want to buy something, you should probably be aware of the price tag first before you let them scan any of your QR codes or whatnot, and don't allow for the payment to be processed first before anything else. So that's that. So moving on, I think the fourth bucket that I wanted to talk about is this general idea of the US business footprint in some of these global MNCs. So some of the few companies that probably you are interested in, and I myself, is that I am an investor of Lululemon. So I came across, in that 7 days, I came across 2 Lululemon stores, and I was visiting them around the 8 to 9 p.m. mark. And when I compare it to Nike and also another competitor called Ju Active in China, they're basically empty. So Nike and Ju Active, they're empty, and Lululemon store is packed. It's jam-packed. You can see people just queuing up and scanning and just buying a lot of all these Lululemon athleisure wears and stuff like that. So I'm really impressed, and I don't know why, because Lululemon, the price tag is similar across China, maybe a little bit cheaper when compared to Singapore, but it's really on the more steeper price point or steeper end. And I don't know why so many people are still buying Lululemon wears, and I think it goes to show the strength of the brand. And I think when comparing it to other US names like Nike, I came across quite a few Nike flagship stores, and I'm just going to post a few of the pictures here, and they really feel like ghost towns. And they're not at like non-prominent places. They're really at some of the best locations with quite a bit of footfall, but it just seems like there's nobody patronizing the stores. I think also to draw a stark contrast when compared to the Lululemon store in that same building or in the same mall, the Nike store was also empty. So that's more on the clothing. Moving on to Starbucks, I think for Starbucks, it's a hit and miss. I've came across quite a lot of Starbucks outlets. I think some places, especially at strategic and more touristy areas, they tend to be quite full, but they're not alone. Meaning to say, I don't think it's really the Starbucks brand, but more so because tourists want to have a place to sit down and to chit-chat and stuff like that. Because when I compare Starbucks to many of the other competitors that are also in the drinking, F&B, beverages kind of space, they all have kind of full or they are fully packed. But when I compare it to the more non-touristy areas, just random areas, most of the Starbucks tend to be empty. They're pretty much empty. And contrasting this to Luckin Coffee, so for Luckin Coffee, I think I usually see many orders being stacked on the sides of the cashiering area, and there usually are not many seats available. I think it's just a difference in strategy where they don't have a lot of real estate. They really just focus on fast-paced, I think fast food style for the coffees. And they localize their differentiation with many of these brand partnership. And I think this is one of them that I just saw. I don't know what characters they are, but yeah, there's a lot of so-called partnerships across many of these brands. And I think when I compare it to many of the other bubble tea joints, which are also in the beverage industry, so I saw companies like hehe or another Chinese company called Cha Yan Yue Se. There seems to always be a queue, and people just like to ingest many of these sugary drinks, and I'm guilty of it myself as well. Last but not least, I think I just wanted to talk a little bit in terms of EV brands or the cars on the road. Generally speaking, I think most of China's the car industry, they have kind of transitioned to EVs or I guess at least hybrid vehicles. But if you were to ask me what brands they are, I don't know how to recognize them. So I can't give you better insights there. But I think one interesting observation that I personally came across was that, so it was near 8 plus PM and I was near this road called Shuxi Road. And I do see a whole stretch of automobile companies. And I see companies like XPeng, Neo, Geely, they're all there. And I see that their lights are all still on at around 8 plus PM. On the flip side, I see global brands or foreign brands like Honda and Mercedes, they are already lights out at 8 plus. So I think it just goes to, I don't think you can take anything specifically from this observation. Honda and Merc, they went out, their lights went out pretty early on, and you see many of these Chinese companies, they're still very competitive, where they still hire people to man the showroom late until at night. So yeah, that's that. So on a side note, I think just a general thoughts here to round up this entire China observation discussion is that, so I think just generally on the road side, I do see a lot of infographics or reminders for the normal Chinese citizens to be good to your parents, filial piety, to be civilized, to be cultured, etc, etc. And I kind of went to China in the non-peak season because it was during winter period and it was kind of cold. I think the temperature was around 0 to 10 degrees. So there wasn't as much of a dynamism and excitement that I expected, especially when you see across the globe through videos. You tend to see a lot of horror story and nightmares about how China they just have a sheer amount of people that sometimes go crazy, especially during peak seasons. But for myself, actually generally it was quite good. There was a bit of tourism here and there, but not as crazy or as exciting. When you see some reports saying that shopping malls are really just empty, this I can concur. Personally, I've visited I think 2 or 3 malls that are really, really empty. 8, 12 floors of really just shopping districts, and it's situated at quite a prominent place. So I can share with you one shopping mall that I went into. I think it was at the heart of Chongqing, and when you go out, it's really a lot of people. But I went into the shopping mall there. I think first floor you still see some sort of activities, but when I go to level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yeah, it was really just empty. All I can see is just myself and maybe 1 or 2 other consumers. It could be because of their value proposition, it could be because of their sales, their offer, whatever it is, but yeah, and it might not necessarily just be fear-mongering and people saying that the Chinese economy is in shambles. And also, there was this interesting ad that I've seen quite multiple times, whether is it on the TT ride itself or big posters or billets, about this phenomenon called 以旧换新国补. Generally speaking, it's just local stimulus where the government is trying to give money to the consumers to try to get them to change up their consumer electronics, their TV, their aircon, stuff like that. So they are basically trying to boost spending in a very indirect way, not outrightly just giving out stimulus checks, but through some of these measures. Not too sure how effective it is, but yeah, I'm seeing them stepping up on this policy front. And on the second part, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Chinese stock market. So in 2025 alone, at least over the past 1.5 weeks, I think the Hang Seng actually fell 4% year to date to around 19,000 points. And the CSI 300 has fell 5% year to date to around 3,700 points. And we've gotten a few hit pieces from Bloomberg, from Financial Times, and I quote, "The Chinese government bond market has opened 2025 with a clear warning for policymakers. Without more determined stimulus, investors expect deflationary pressures to become even more entrenched." So the bond yield fell to a record low of 1.6%, and the yield curve shifted downwards, suggesting that investors are more alarmed about the long-term outlook. And more insidious than slower growth are the deflationary pressures in China's economy. It is the 7th in a row in which the GDP deflator was negative. And this is unprecedented for China, with a similar episode only in the 1998-1999 era. So I think you can really see of this whole macro conditions in China today, where a lot of the rotation or a lot of the money is being parked into government bond yields. And as you know, they have an inverse relationship where yield is going down, means prices are going up. And prices are going up because demand for many of these government bonds are increasing exponentially. So I guess you can kind of attribute it to many of reasons. Firstly, I think there's a lot of easy money around. People are slushed with cash. I think banks, financial institutions, they have a lot of money because savings rate in China continuously to climb up, especially in bad economic times. In bad times, people save more because they are worried about the outlook of the future. And because of this a lot of cash just sitting around, people then just buy government bonds, and that's basically what driving the demand for bonds, and that's why the yield is coming down. Secondly, I think it still kind of speaks the trust in the government bonds. They don't think that the Chinese government will default, but yet at the same time, they are not interested in putting it in risk assets. That's why the stock market continues to slide downwards. People's expectations and outlook for the future is quite challenged. It's probably a very tough economic environment as well. So a lot of people are risk off. Nobody's interested in taking on risks. And many of these expectations in terms of stimulus and whatnot, they are a lot more supply focused, not so much in terms of trying to stimulate the demand. So I think a multitude of many of these different factors, and of course people not spending money, the economy is now not very optimistic, and I think it's kind of reflected in the stock market as well. So I believe March 5th of 2025 is actually D-Day. Investors, both in the stock market and the bond market, everybody is looking towards what the central government is going to announce, what's their expectations, and what massive measures they are going to undertake. So we keep our eyes peeled, but for now, I think we are still stuck in this limbo. And I think maybe even looking into March or the first 2 months of 2025, you might not expect violent movements or expectations being priced into the stock market at all. So a recent observation is that the gap between US and Chinese assets actually hit a new extreme. It actually moved up to 2 standard deviations away. The S&P currently trades at a 60% premium over the MSCI China. And I quote, "I get that both economies are currently in different places right now, but are markets overly optimistic on the US or overly pessimistic on China? I think I'll leave it up to you to decide." But I think the fundamental truth, if you believe for investing, is that if you believe in the long term, that earnings will drive returns, then go back and look at the companies that you own and their earnings growth and how they're situated in terms of the business environment, macro, and stuff like that. Are they still growing their earnings? Do you see or do you expect their earnings to continue growing? And how would the expectations fit into your own valuations and expectations moving forward? Because I fundamentally do believe that if companies do provide strong earnings growth, and shareholders will be rewarded at the end of the day, whether it's through buybacks, dividends, or just pure revaluation. Also, a lot of comparisons today talking about how the US might be overvalued just because it went up a lot, and vice versa, where China is expected or it should go up because of the GDP growth, the earnings growth, and stuff like that. But I think this mindset is kind of dangerous. And let's go back down to the basics on what drive returns, and really do an audit on your portfolio. Look at the portfolio of companies that you own, and do you think that they still deserve of the place in your portfolio because of great earnings growth, and rather than just because they're cheap. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoyed this sharing session, and I hope to see you in the next video, but more importantly, I hope to see you guys finally on the moon in 2025. Goodbye!